recording now.
Yep, a couple of people already contacted me and asked whether or not this will be recorded. We've somehow get it onto our YouTube page or the website. I'll work that out later. Also, this presentation will be available on our website as well, so that you can have a look at it as well. So thank you everyone for coming in. As said, this is just a brief presentation on NFPA 91, the 2021 edition. It's an update, obviously every 3 years or 4 years in this case, that they bring out the new one. And there has been a few changes, and it's always good to keep up to date into what is happening in the FI space. So well done for logging in and actually looking at what the changes are. Now, if I can control Bob's, there we go. Special thanks. I actually looked at this. If you're a member of the IAAI, you can have a look at this, Randy's presentation. So Randy is actually the chair of the 921 committee. He actually finished up now and he's handed it over. So he did this presentation through the IAAI. You can actually get on there, do one of their, I think they've stopped showing it now, but it was available. You paid your $20 US, and I had a look at that. So this is basically this presentation. He gave it to Peter Mancy, who's the UK president or UK past president, and he actually presented this to everyone in the UK. And I actually grabbed this off Peter. So from Randy to Peter to me, and that's how I managed to get this information. So it's not my original. I've basically copied a copy. And I would also like to say that I'm not an expert in NFPA 91 by a long shot. I do know the document well. I read it plenty of times, and I should have probably read it a lot more earlier in my career. But as said in their presentation, the views expressed here are certainly not the views of the committee. There's a lot of it is in my view, and I've given my opinion. I'll be giving my opinion on a few things as we go through it. I think there's one more to be admitted there, Pete. Bob.
Yeah, I'm going up to that now. Waiting room. Yes.
I'll do it.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. So I wanted to briefly talk about NFPA and how they do things and their process, because if you understand how NFPA do their thing, it makes it a bit easier for you to understand what 921 is and what they're trying to do. The process that NFPA follow is certainly, they try to follow a due process, and that is being open and having a number of people on each of their committees, their technical committees, so that there is no dominance and they have that balance. So they have a number of people from different parts of the industry on the committee, so that they're all giving their input into the peer review process for each cycle. And then at the end of that, hopefully, the document is as good as it can be. And because it's being updated every 3 years, there is new and more and better information coming out of it. And that's the goal of NFPA. They're trying to actually increase the way the system is done by having that transparency and balance. When you look at, and the revision cycles allows them to update it every 3 years, and that's a good thing, I think. Because there is, as Randy always says to, that the science of fire has never changed. It doesn't change, but our understanding of fire is always changing. And that's why these documents need to be updated, because that understanding is always changing. New technology, new understandings is happening, and that's what you need as a fire investigator. I think you should be up to date in that information. In terms of the technical committee, this is what it is made up of. They have about 33, I think it is 34 members on the committee. So it's a pretty large committee. And these are the different people that are within that committee. Experts, they've got users, people from insurance, people from research, law enforcement, and then obviously consumers and manufacturers are all also represented on this committee. So you would have to agree that this committee is quite balanced. It has input from a lot of people from different areas in the fire investigation industry. And at the end of that, I think that what they're being produced is a very good document. So that is a very important that, they have quite a large committee that is balanced. So looking over the history of NFPA 921, it's now the 10th edition. 10 times it's been revised since 1992. And you can see that in 1992, 14 chapters, 119 pages, pretty small document. And it was, over the years, it has. Sorry, he just muted me and I've just unmuted myself.
Good.
Back into it. So the every 3 years, except for 2008 and again in 2021, it was a 4-year cycle. I'll explain that in a second. But every 3 years, and now you've got a document or a reference book over 400 pages, 29 chapters, and you would have to agree that it is a very detailed document and a lot of information for fire investigators to use. So why was there a 4-year cycle? So what I've been told, in the first quarter of last year, there was a perceived imbalance in the committee, and NFPA sort of found this and they decided, okay, they're going to ask the entire committee to resign and reapply for their position. And so they got rid of a few members on the committee, and that changed it to make it a more of a balanced committee. That was the delay in why it wasn't published last year. And that's why you see the 4-year cycle. This also happened between 2004 and 2008. NFPA just made a change in their process, and that's why there was that change. And there it is there. So they had to all apply. And again, the technical committee has to appoint their members annually. They are all volunteers too, and that's one thing I didn't know, is they don't get paid anything for this. It's all volunteers. They have to fly themselves to the technical committee. They meet twice a year, and then they obviously have to go through all the documents and all the reviews and all the comments made by the public, and then they have to come up with a version, first draft, second draft, etc., which we'll go through in a sec. But you do not have to be a member of the NFPA to be a technical committee member, and also you don't have to be on the committee to actually serve on a task group, which we'll talk about in a sec. So you can be a part of the committee if you want to. You can apply, and also, which we'll talk about in a sec, is you can make comments about the document if you feel that there is something you want to talk about or want to change in the document. You can certainly do that. Are we seeing reference this manual in New South Wales criminal court matters? So, a question from Paul Sweeney. Good question, yeah, and that does come up a little bit. I'll answer that now. I remember in the 2016 conference, I said to the coroner, New South Wales coroner Michael Barnes, I said, "Sir, have you heard of NFPA 921?" He goes, "No, I've never." So they don't know. The judiciary don't know too much about NFPA 921. I think it's getting better. It should be more known out there, but it's, I think, slowly coming around. People are starting to get it, learn it, and know it a lot more. I know certainly from fire rescue's perspective, when I speak with prosecutors and things like that, I'm always speaking to it. There you go. So Rachel's just said that it has been mentioned and referred to in court in Victoria. And yeah, when I write a statement, I'm always referencing it in a statement. And certainly when Trevor's just come in, we might just mute you, Trevor.
Do that now.
Thank you. We can certainly, in the court system, I've certainly been, they've questioned me on it and they've talked about it. So again, in Australia and New Zealand, I would suggest that it's a small part of the judiciary would know about it, but it's certainly not as big as in the US. In the US, it's huge. You have to know 921. 921 has already been referred as the gold standard when it comes to fire investigation, like conducting a fire investigation. In Australia, I would say it's less known, but I think you should be referencing it. I think you should be using it because it's the only guide out there in the whole world, and I think it would assist you in making a better opinion if you end up in a court somewhere. So I think it's a very good document to use and reference. So what happens when a revision or a new cycle or new edition comes out is that people are allowed to comment on it, and they open up the document for comments, and they then produce a date or say a date that the first draft from all those comments comes out. So for the 2021 edition, which was opened up after the 2017 edition was published, the first draft closed in August 2018, and then those draft information was posted on June last year. That was after, I think, when the committee came. Yes, Richard Wood's question. Remember, it's still a guide, as you have mentioned, Michael. That is an important point. Yes, it is a guide. You don't have to use it. But, if you're not using it, what are you using, I would say? You don't want to just rely on your own experience. You want to rely on what information is out there. You want to rely on what is happening scientifically in fire investigation. You don't just want to rely on what you think is happening. So yeah, it's a guide. Don't have to follow it from exactly, but you should be using it as well as your experience in formulation of your opinion. Good point, Richard. Thank you. Second draft then closed, and I might say Richard Woods is listening, and he is chair of the wildfire group on the IAAI. So he has some interest in this document and was actually consulted about changes to Chapter 28, which we'll talk about shortly. So second draft closed August last year, and then it was posted at the beginning of this year, and there were no comments from that or no changes. So then the document was issued late August, and you can see it now, and it's also now available, and you can get it from FPAA, which I'll talk about at the end, where you can purchase it. So from the first draft, they asked a public notice issued, so that it was with a closing date of August, so that people can make a proposal or make a comment or disagree or put a new section in if they wanted to. They submit a proposal. Obviously, the staff within NFPA can't do it. And those proposals can request anything. And a proposal can be written by anyone. So you can write to NFPA and say, I believe that NFPA 921 should change this bit and it should read this way. And that will go to the committee, and the committee will consider it. But you obviously have to provide a reason for the change so that they can talk about it and discuss it, and then they vote on it. And that's how changes are made. So yeah, the forms for that are on fpa.org. And then all those proposals must be acted on from the committee. And that was then posted on by the 4th of June last year. For this year, there was for this edition, there was over 500 public inputs compared to the 283. So you can see that this change or this edition has had a large number of public input, which I think is good. There's a lot of people interested in the document, and therefore the changes, which is the most changes they've ever had, has been significant in this edition. So the first draft closed, and that was posted in 2019. And then the second draft, anyone can make comment on a proposal. The comment must be on the proposal, and then you must have a reason. And again, you fill out those forms on the website. There's a deadline. And again, each comment from those proposals must be acted on by the committee. Again, this one, 311 public inputs compared to 83 just for the from the 2017 edition. And again, that was closed last year, and then it posted again in February this year. So the 2021 edition, the content of this is based on the comparison of the committee actions taken during the first draft, which is the public input, and the actions taken during the second draft, the comments. So what we're going to be going through here is these changes of the first and second draft. Now, one good thing about, there's plenty of good things, but one which is really, really handy is that when they publish new editions, they sort of highlight what's new, what's been deleted, and any revisions and stuff like that. And this edition, they've actually put it at the bottom of every page. So when you open up any page here, and then you look at the bottom of the page, you can sort of see what the area means. So that's probably a bit hard to see. down the bottom. There it is a bit there. And it says down there, as you can say, the shaded text means it's been revised. The text deletion is that little symbol. The dot is the section deletions, and the capital N is new material. So that's a good quick reference just as for yourself as you're reading through this document and you see that, and that's a really good reference to say, oh, this is new. So as you go through, it's a good idea to have a look at that, and having it on each page also reminds you, oh, that's right, that's what that means. Because on the last edition, I have to go to the front of the page. I said, what does that mean again? Is that new material or is it a revision? So, of course, most people should have or would have heard that the most controversial change this year, or this edition, has been removal of Chapter 20, which is the classification of fire cause. Now, we'll go through that in detail as we come through it, but that is the biggest change. And to be honest, well, reading into this, it has been on the agenda from the committee for a number of cycles, and I guess it's come to a head and they've finally decided, yes, we're going to get rid of it. So we'll talk about that soon. But in summary, more changes to the whole document than any recent edition. Some just updating reference citations, some chapters completely revised, and then Chapter 20 completely deleted. And so many more that we'll not get to all of them. Okay, yeah, and that's what he says. This presentation doesn't go through all of the changes. You obviously, when you get the document, you can actually go through it and see which is new and which isn't. But the major ones is the one we're going to talk about today. So in the definitions, which is Chapter 4, it does talk about canine handler team, which is good. They're introducing that. And then it talks about actually, I mean, one of the main changes there is actually what they're going to be called. They used to be called accelerant detection canine. Now they call them ignitable liquid canine teams. So that's an important distinction. They're trying to actually sort of define what the canines are capable of doing, and I think that's a good thing as well. And so it goes through the definition of what is a canine handler team and what is a handler as well. And then they have other changes in Chapter 15 and Chapter 17. In the definitions, yes, Craig Gordon, great change, thank you. Fire patterns, so that has changed a bit. A fire pattern is identifiable shape or progression of fire effects. Arc melting of conductors and conducting surfaces as a result of electrical arcing. So these are the new definitions that have been put in Chapter 4. Severe arc mapping has been defined differently. And of course, one of the main ones is certainly cause. So the cause used to be identification of the ignition source, the fuel, and the circumstances that brought them all together. Now it's just the circumstances, conditions, or agencies that brought about or resulted in the fire or explosion incident, damage to property, bodily injury, or loss of life. Okay, so that's an evolving thing. They're just obviously playing on words to make it sound as best as they can. So that sounds to me like the cause is they've got it right there. So fire now definition, a rapid oxidation process, which is an exothermic chemical reaction resulting in the evolution of light and heat in varying intensities. So new definitions for fire chemistry, minimum ignition energy. And obviously you've got a lot of experts on the panels or the committee to actually update these definitions, which they would agree with. Fire investigator, an individual who has demonstrated the skills and knowledge necessary to conduct, coordinate and complete a fire investigation. Now that's taken directly from 1033, which makes sense that the both are saying the same thing. I imagine that's why that was changed. Line of demarcation, ventilation, specific gravity, these are all new definitions in Chapter 4. So now Chapter 6, this chapter was completely revised. A scientific method type flowchart was developed for the interpretation of fire patterns. So this is where they come in and say, well, when you're collecting data, fire effects, what are the fire effects? Well, they are discoloration, deposition, deformation, and loss of mass. Now, we'll go in the next slide what that means. But one of the big changes is arc mapping. It was moved away from electricity and origin determination and moved into fire patterns. And I think that's a good thing as well. I mean, I've never done arc mapping before in any of my jobs, probably a lack of knowledge and understanding from my part. But now I think they've recognised they used to have the 4 pillars of origin. One was witness information, fire patterns, I can't remember the third one, and arc mapping. And they've taken away arc mapping. Now there's just those 3 areas for origin determination. So arc mapping goes into fire patterns, which is chapter 6. Okay, so as you come in, recognise the need to find the problem, collect data. These fire effects are going to be the discoloration, deposition, deformation, and loss of mass. These are the fire patterns that we're going to, they're sort of the categories that they are distinguishing now. So as you can see there, discoloration is like your oxidation, deformation, breaking of glass, deposition, smoke on surfaces, and then your mass loss, which is your char, spalling, calcination, etc. So those are the different that's a new table, fire effects category. So they now come under different categories. Yes, and again, developing more than one hypothesis. So that's one of the big ones as well. Under the scientific method, it used to say develop a hypothesis. Now it's saying develop hypotheses. So it's telling you should be developing more than one hypothesis. And that means that, and that's good, and that is true. Rather than just saying one, you've got to develop more. So that's a significant change in the scientific method. And so onto the arcing of electrical conductors. Again, if you can see how the document looks. They actually this is in the draft, like I think the second draft. When you go on, and anyone can have access to this, you just create an account at nfpa.org. And you can go in and get. You can actually sign up to be get an alert whenever the NFPA 921 document something changes in it, and you can actually go into there and look at the first draft and second draft, and this is what it will look like. It'll say, okay, this is what it used to say. There is electrical power, and there'll be a line through it. Okay, so we've deleted that, and the underline is what we're going to insert. So that's what people can look at it and go, okay, so that's what's going to be the change. And then the committee then obviously looks at it, and then that goes to a vote, and that's how things are changed. So arc damage to a conductor is evidence that electrical power was available, and you can see how things have been taken out as well from there. Okay, so again, arc sites are evidence that a circuit was energized when the arcing occurred. However, absence of arc melting is not definitive. Okay, so that's some of the changes there for some of the arcing. So section 7, heating systems. Certainly, they said that new section was added, a building systems chapter. Okay, so this goes on to talks about boilers and furnaces and stuff like that. So that's the changes to chapter 7.10. In chapter 8, active fire protection systems. This had extensive revisions, mainly editorial, as it says. There were some other significant ones in there. And chapter 9, electricity and fire. This chapter, extensive revisions throughout. The more significant one was about arc mapping. And so that decision was made to remove it as from electrical and put it into chapter 6 as a fire pattern. One of the things that was added, lithium-ion batteries, which is obviously everyone knows that it would be a hot topic at the moment. So there was some information put in there about that, which is good. It's finally coming into 921, a bit more information on lithium-ion. Electrical bonding and grounding, new definition there. So fire-related human behaviour. So 11.5 was changed to youth fire setting behaviour. Sort of best describes, rather than saying children, youth fire setting behaviour. So that was updated as well. Safety, and again, this is a very important chapter, and I mean, I've been guilty of not being as safe as I can be, but we all need to be as safe as we can. And the IAAI has done a great job with their best practices. And if you go to that website there, white paper, IAAIwhitepaper.com, you can get the quick facts and the document on health best practices. And this is a great little card you can just print out for yourself, and just something to think about. If you have a team of people, just put it on your notice board or in the office, so people get a good look at what they should be doing and what they're trying to protect, because exposure is a big thing in fire investigation, and certainly you want to minimise the exposure. And their book there, so that's been updated as of May this year, and the best practices is it's the IAAA has published this, and it's, I'd say, it would be world standard. So, you or your organisation can certainly copy the stuff like this and have it there and just copy it. It's good reference material for the safety of fire investigators everywhere. And it goes into PPE and other things, appropriate PPE for working conditions. There's another photo of how it should be done. Okay, so chapter 14, sources of information. So it again talks about significant changes to make it more beneficial. Scientific method requires collection of data. Yes, this chapter was revised to assist investigators. So that's an important update as well. So canine teams are certainly the first edition that they started to really talk about what a canine team and what it's related, how they relate to fire investigation and how they assist. So there has some changes from 2017, but as you can see, they have a role in fire investigation, including assisting, locating, collecting samples for laboratory analysis. So yeah, certainly they are getting a lot more talked about in fire investigation, so that is a good thing. Documenting the investigation, again, there's been a few updates in there. Certainly the 3D scanners are certainly coming in on board, especially in the US. I don't see anyone use it over here, but I think that they are going to be more, as the price comes down, more used more and more soon. What's next? Right, so here we go. Yes, so fire dynamics. So the origin determination, yes. So they used to say, okay, we have 4 pillars on our origin determination, which is witness information and electronic data, fire patterns, arc mapping, and fire dynamics. So that's where they've taken away arc mapping, and now it's just the 3: fire dynamics, fire patterns, and that witness information, electronic data. So I think that's a good thing. Like I said, I mean, I don't understand it that well. I've never used it, and I just didn't like arc mapping. I didn't understand it. So now it's not part of that origin part. It's just a fire pattern. You can still use it if you know how to. For me, I don't use it. So arc surveys or arc mapping was removed and put in chapter 6. And then it talks about experimental testing. So this is, as you can say, trying to conduct tests to hopefully identify origin hypotheses. Experimental testing results are substantially similar to the damage of the scene. Okay, so it's just saying, you can use it if it is consistent with what you're seeing at a scene, but sometimes the results are not substantially similar with the damage. An alternative origin hypothesis or additional data maybe need to be considered. So it's just saying that there again, keep using experiments if you can to test your hypotheses, and then hopefully that will help in making your final hypotheses a little bit more solid. Now, they've obviously kept in the undetermined fire cause because even though they're taking away the classification, certainly the cause of fire is undetermined. So for that, they've taken away a little bit, but it's saying that the final opinion is only good as the quality of the data. If the level of certainty of the opinion is only possible, then the fire cause has to be undetermined. And this decision as to the quality of data and level of certainty of the opinions rests with the investigator. So again, the investigator's got to decide. Now, chapter 20. So this is the, I guess, the most controversial area. So what actually happened here was that the chapter was certainly addressed. Now, it's been addressed in previous editions, and they were able to actually say to people, okay, shall we remove it? And it always went back and got through. The vote always got through. But this year, the committee decided to eliminate the chapter and add a citation at the end of chapter 19, directing the investigator to the appropriate standards if they need the fire cause classification. So remember that there is a difference between cause of the fire and the classification of fire. Cause has changed slightly. It's just the circumstances that brought everything together to create the fire. The classification is the 1 of 4. So they removed that. Now, why did they do that? Well, it certainly wasn't an easy decision to make. During the first phase, the committee revised the chapter to discuss the classifying the incident instead of the cause. This is an attempt to address the confusion related to fire cause versus fire cause classification. They've said that over the years, they've always had confusion between this. What is the cause and what is the fire cause classification? And they still believe there is confusion. So the elimination of the chapter is to try and reduce that confusion. But there are people on the committee saying that it won't reduce the confusion, actually increase the confusion. But we'll get to that in a sec. So remember, the fire cause, circumstances to bring the fuel, ignition source, oxygen together to initiate a fire. The classification, once that the cause is determined, the classification can be evaluated being accidental, natural, incendiary, undetermined. The main reason for classifying fires in one of these categories is for statistical data. Now, that is true. For public agencies, we need statistics. We need to know how many accidental fires we're going to, how many deliberate fires, what are the trends, are they going up, are they going down? And police need that as well. But they felt that the biggest problem with the classification is understanding a person's intent. And they talk about, okay, this is the committee statement. So scope of 921 specifically states that the completion of reports US Fire National. Now, that's the same as Australia. In Australia, it's called AIRS, Australian Incident Reporting System. That says that completing those reports are outside the scope of this guide. However, the classification of incidents is a topic that is addressed in various entities for various reasons. As such, there is a need to provide guidance on where incident classification information can be found and to clarify that the incident classification is not the same as cause determination. The technical committee has fielded debates over Chapter 20 over the past editions and has determined that chapter creates more issues than benefits since incident classification is addressed in other standards and is independent on jurisdiction, organisation, use. Providing specific definitions for incident classification is 921 is not necessary. So it means that the biggest problem is that over the years, the whole reason for bringing 921 into is to use the scientific method, because before that, what were they using? So they're trying to bring the science back into it. So using the scientific method for origin and then using the scientific method for cause. Now, when we identify that cause, we're now saying if a fire is deliberate, then you are obviously looking at someone has intent. With the definition of incendiary fire is that the intent to cause a fire where a fire should not be. So we're using the scientific method for origin and cause, yet as fire investigators, we're deciding on the intent on someone. Now, how does that happen? How do we do that? We are not trained, we are not qualified to opine on someone's intent. And this is the confusion around it. And this is why they have a problem with it. And in the end, why they removed it. We don't know the intent of a person. And so Randy gives a very simple explanation or example. You go to a house fire, fire's in the kitchen. You go up to the cooktop, and on the cooktop, we have burnt foodstuffs. Okay, so we've got a fire here. We've got the stoves on, fire burnt, the food. What is the classification? How do we know that that is an accidental fire? How do we know that it's not a deliberate fire? The intent here is important. And so they see it as too hard, or not too hard, but the confusion around the intent is very, very difficult. So they feel that it's not part of 921 to be able to opine on the intent, rather than to stick to origin and cause, and the cause being identifying the ignition source and the first fuel. And in this instance, it's the food with the stove on. So that is, I guess, the reasoning. And after much debate, question from Mark C. Intent is surely a matter for the court. Yes, absolutely. And this is where, from our perspective, especially in Australia and New Zealand, is we don't look at arrest or charging and stuff like that. That's for the police. The police have to establish intent, and then the court has to decide whether or not they believe in that, and that is for them to decide. So you are right. But in this instance, or this document, the removal of the classifications is because of that. Now, public versus private, a public agency needs and wants to have those classifications for its statistical data. Private, I'm not a private fire investigator, but I would imagine that it doesn't really matter in their sense, in terms of they just want to know, they're not opining on intent as well, but they want to know just the first fuel ignited and the ignition source as well. So, but from a public agency, and then I do know from under AFAC, we have the Fire Investigation Network. They met early this year because I explained that this was being deleted. And so the Fire Investigation Network under AFAC is all agencies under AFAC that have a fire investigation component sit on that group. And they decided that they were going to keep the fire cause classifications for all agencies under AFAC. So that means Australia and New Zealand will be keeping the fire cause classifications. So I can get why the committee did it. I understand it. And even Randy sort of said in his presentation that, this may work, this may not work. And in the next edition, they may remove it or, bring it back in. It will wait to be seen. It depends on the comments. And again, here is your opportunity, if you disagree with that, to certainly make your voice known to the committee and sort of write to them and put a public input into the next edition and say why you think you should keep it. Now, listen, there are a couple of articles that were well written, which are in, if you're an IAAI member, in the journal for April and July, written by the FISC committee, which is the Fire Investigation Standards Committee, and I only just joined that committee, and it goes into into exactly what it's all about, and there's a couple of good comments in there which I will show you. So these are they have a bulletin board, the FISC committee, and they talk about different issues about the standards around fire investigation. And this one is a very good one. So it goes into exactly why it was removed and the debate around it. And then there's also and it says here, so the two comments, so there was 33. So the second revision deleting Chapter 20 passed the ballot. Of the 33 votes on the TC, 2 ballots were not returned, 28 members affirmative and 3 voted negative with comments. Those TC members casting negative votes on intersect are required to provide comment, and here are 2 of them. Now, here's one again. It is a practical reality that public fire investigators are regularly upon to fulfill the important community service of classifying the fires they investigate. When a community experiences a fire, the most immediate public concern is classification of the fire, namely whether or not the fire was accidental or result of intentional criminal act. The more technical specifics of the cause, ignition source, first fuel oxidizer, I'll get to that in a second, Greg. I'll get to your question in a second. Are not necessarily as important as the general public. As a result, someone must serve the community need and to make a judgment about classification. And in real world practice, the public fire investigator is often the most informed and professional, capable person to do so. This is true because making a judgment about classification of a fire is intrinsically linked to the determination of cause. So that's his comment. And the next one as well says, I believe the committee is making a significant mistake by removing all references to fire cause classification from the next edition. The stated reason in support of this revision is to decrease confusion. In my opinion, the revision will actually create more confusion. In particular, investigators, attorneys, and courts depend on the cause classification in many legal proceedings. Removing all references to classification from the next edition may lead investigators, attorneys, and court to conclude that the investigators are no longer permitted to classify fires because it is beyond their scope of expertise. Indeed, some attorneys may have already begun to argue that fire investigators are not qualified to classify fires. I strongly recommend the committee reject this removal of the chapter and consider a revised edition. So those are the 2 comments that were made, and you can read in that article. Now, I'm a little bit biased. I am a public fire investigator, and I do agree with what they're saying. And I think that they should be back in there. But, what is done is done, and this is what we're dealing with. And again, as a guide, you don't have to agree, or you don't have to not use them. You can still use them if you wish. But you can see the comments there, and this may cause people around the world to obviously put in their comments and change that. Now, just a question from Greg. Regarding AFAC, will data or fire reports point out that it is for data collection, as some people in law firms start litigation based on the information in those reports? Will data or fire reports point out that it is for data collection, as some people? Okay. Greg, do you want to unmute yourself and just ask? I'm quite a bit confused on that.
Yeah, mate, what I'm saying is if it's for data collection, some people go ahead and start litigation, particularly in the civil arena, based on the information that's, say, in an AIRS report. But if it's mainly being classified because of data, will there be some disclaimer? I know there are some of the reports where you have that. So if you have to start litigation, don't rely on this report, and say, will that be pointed out that is classification because of data collection? To you or not? I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
Hard to say. It's hard to say. I don't know. It's if actually in my next slide, I'll explain. A lawyer in the States has written an article on what could possibly happen. From our perspective, again, when I said at the start that the industry in the US is massive, and Australia and New Zealand, it's a lot smaller. And again, the knowledge of this document is quite small in this country. It's getting better, but certainly I think anything is possible in a court when you get in there. That obviously barristers are entitled to ask you any type of questions. So it's possible that may come into it. It's hard to say. It's early days. We don't know. If you have a look at the next slide. So in that July edition again of the journal, chapter 20, they talk about that, how the proposed changes may impact your courtroom testimony. That's a good read. Again, it's American-based. So, the industry's so big over there, everyone wants a piece of the pie, and they're all vying for, their bit in the sunlight, I guess. But it's an interesting article of what may happen in the US. Again, it's hard to say how serious that will make things change in Australia.
Michael, I think
Yes.
Cambridge is asking to speak. If David wants to unmute himself.
Yeah, sure.
David, are you there? And unmute.
It was just a follow-up for Greg's comment to say that he was perhaps referring to a caveat in our reports to suggest that the following fire cause classification is for statistical purposes, but it's been answered. Thanks.
Okay, beautiful.
And Michael, do you want to comment on grants? Do you have opposing arguments on Chapter 20?
Oh, yes. In my opinion, I don't think they should have removed it. I think they should have kept it. But again, I'm biased in terms of the from a public agency. We need that data to sort of look at trends in fire. I want to know how many accidental fires there are. I want to know how many deliberate fires there are. So, yeah, I'm against it, but so be it. Any other questions? No? Cool. So the fire cause, in the end, Chapter 19, incident classification. So classifying a fire incident is different from the cause determination or analysing the fire incident for purposes for assigning responsibility. So classifying a fire incident requires the application of a common language achieved through a classification system that consists of a series of definitions and labels ascribed to certain phenomena. If an incident requires classification, the investigator should refer to the appropriate classification system. So that's what they're saying here. So refer to their reporting system or our reporting system. The NFPA 901, ATF have got their own reporting system. So again, that's what they're saying here. You can refer to EARS in Australia, or what are they using in New Zealand. So Chapter 22, fire failure analysis and analytical tools. A few changes there. Chapter 24, incendiary fires. A few changes there. So to the origin and cause determination, as well as identifying potential witnesses. Okay. So a few changes there as well. Incendiary fires. Vehicles. A few changes in the diesel fuel there. About some fires can be caused by atomised engine oil. And chapter 28, Mr. Woods' favourite chapter, wildfire investigation. So what happened here is that they created a task group to look at changing or the wildfire investigation chapter. So this obviously is in, let me just bring up the other one. So this is also based on the National Wildfire Coordination Group, which have got their own document on how to conduct a wildfire investigation. So I know that Richard is on that committee to create that document. And so they basically want, obviously they're trying to keep what that committee wants, or that document wants to be the same as this document. And so they're looking at trying to change 921. A few people wanted some changes. So they said, okay, we'll create a group. The task group was created. I think Richard actually sat on that task group and looked at working on a revision of that chapter. First draft revision was proposed by a committee member for a rewrite of the chapter. This proposal was accepted by the committee. This public input narrowly passed the ballot. So it was, the committee was split almost. Significant public comments were received during the second draft phase. As a result, a new task group was established to address those public comments. The task group reported the committee 3 options. So either revise it, adopt the task group proposal with revision, or revert to the 2017 edition text. In other words, no changes at all, and look at it in the next cycle. There was a lot of debate forward and backwards. The committee elected to revert to the 2017 edition. It was getting too late in this cycle, and so the vote was unanimous to hold the 2017 edition text and look at the next one. Now, Richard Woods is online. Richard, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Michael. I think you can hear me. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Look, yeah. Look, I was involved in that process, and I guess what was underlying with this is, over the years, both the NFPA document and the NWCG documents were in tandem. That is, they were reviewed at the same time. What we found with this process, there was a push to try and align a lot of the terminology into the structural fire world, which started to cause angst, obviously, with terminology used in bushfire management, wildfire management, was going to be changed. And there was a real sort of slide to say, to make it more amenable to, I guess, structural investigators to get involved, particularly in the US scenario, in a lot of their litigation areas. And essentially what we were trying to push on behalf of the NWCG side of things was keeping consistent with what we're doing at the moment, which is, all the same terminology that the wildfire folk out there would be familiar with. But we got to a point there that there was so much change that was going to be proposed, and what we ended up doing was putting up 2 proposals. One was based on NWCG, and the other was put forward by the committee members in the US on what they wanted to see, and it was put to the vote. The NWCG document was voted down, but what they did vote for at that point was the version that was put forward by the other members, which was in fact incomplete, and that was one of the sticky points we had around, well, we can't vote for something that's not going to be finalised. So end of the day, there was a number of other experts not involved in wildfire investigation on this technical committee panel. And one of them I had a good chat to in Texas last year, and he's a lawyer, has litigation background, but no practical experience. And what we ended up deciding upon was the process at that point needed to be kept in tandem. And then the conference I was at, there was a lawyer from the Forest Service there who has had great anxiety over the fact that there was going to be differing processes for wildfire investigation from both documents. And at one point, there was a suggestion made at the technical committee that maybe the wildfire component needs to be taken out of 921 altogether, because we're dealing with a different beast. At that point, we wanted to try and keep it in there. And there was a lot of good suggestions that were put forward that we were happy to consolidate into the chapter. Anyhow, long and short of it, at the moment, the existing chapter remains the same as the 2017 version, looking at updating it again down the track. But like all this stuff, it's all evolving. The NWCG material started to date itself. So there's going to have to be some sort of consolidation in the US particularly. And bear in mind, you know, when you're looking at the way that the NWCG is managed, a lot of it is based on land management agencies in the US. They don't follow 921, and therefore organisations such as CAL FIRE and Forest Service have actually stood back and said, we don't need to look at 921 because we don't actually use it, and we'll use the NWCG material, which you've just posted up.
Just explain the NWCG again, just for those that don't know, Richard.
So it's a land management group and also made up of fire agencies in North America, and I sit on that as well as a subject matter expert. And basically, they are the organisation. When you look at things like fire, aviation management, and wildfire management and suppression and fuel management, they're the gurus, I guess, for North America, and Australia again has adopted a lot of their practices and procedures out of that. And the wildfire investigation component sits under that umbrella group. So it's pretty influential over there, and you know, there was a lot of anxiety over this whole process of how we accept or process and move it on. But a lot of the bigger agencies over there, as I said, such as the Forest Service, say, look, it doesn't affect us. We'll stick with the NWCG protocols and arrangements. So that's where it all sits at the moment. Long and short, it doesn't really make much difference at this point because they're both still in tandem with the NWCG material.
And it's the handbook that they produce is the Wildfire Origin and Cause Determination Handbook, and that's, I guess, the go-to for all wildfire investigation around the world, really, isn't it?
Correct. And at one point, I made the comment of, if we want to do this properly, the chapter 28, the wildfire chapter, probably needs to incorporate everything that's in that handbook. And I said, well, there's no point in doing that because now we're, you know, the 921 will be 16 inches thick, you know, so it needs to be some sort of compromise, and we really were bouncing back and forth of how we're going to make this work for everyone. And you know, my counterparts, a lot of the US agencies, as I say, have said, well, look, end of the day, we're going to, you know, CAL FIRE, for instance, we'll just march on using NWCG materials. So,
and you can download that for free, can't you? You can get a copy.
Correct. Yeah. Just Google search it, and it's out there available for public comment.
And what's the recent edition? 2014 or something, wasn't it?
2016 is the latest one.
2016.
It's still valid.
And they're looking to revise that soon, I think you said.
Yeah, there's thought about doing that, and you know, with all the latest technical processes that are now coming out, you know, there needs to be incorporation of some of those procedures. Right. But essentially, one of those points was, terminology can't be changed because then we're changing all the wildfire management terminology or impacting on that in the bigger fire management world of wildfire. So, you know, it needed to be a document that's in tandem.
Great. And do you think you'll be on the task force for the 921 committee for Chapter 28 revision? Yeah.
And I was talking to my counterpart in California this afternoon, and he's of the same opinion. One of the fellows who was in charge of the CAL FIRE investigations unit there. We want to make it work. It's just a matter of you know, making sure the right people are represented too. You know, that was one of our concerns was not having the practitioners on there from the US that had that input. So, but look, on the whole, we didn't have a total rejection of it. We're happy to keep it happening because I think it's important. Both documents need to complement each other, and at the moment, we certainly do. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Richard. As Richard is obviously the expert in wildfire, and it's good to get his input here. Thank you, Richard. So as you can see, that's in Chapter 28, the committee made a statement there just to say that they're going to keep the text as the 27 edition and look to enhancing it for the future edition. There was a question there from Craig, but I'm going to get to that about the PDF release. I believe it is an issue that needs to be addressed. So, yeah, I'm about to talk about that, Craig, coming to it. Okay, so from 28, so Annex, there was a few changes to the Annex, obviously, and yes, always beneficial to go to the source documents when studying for a specific topic, certainly. So PDF, that's been another big issue, and apparently the committee wasn't aware that PDF was not available. So what have they done? So NFPA have decided in their wisdom to not provide PDFs. They still provide a hardcover of the standard or the document, but they won't be providing an electronic. So what you have to do now is subscribe to them, and it's called NFPA Link. And at the moment, if you're an individual, $10 a month. If you've got a team up to 10 people, $50, $40, $46 a month. This is US dollars. And then if you're bigger than that, you got to get a quote. So this is going to pan out. Organisations such as ours, I think our organisation is going to subscribe to it because obviously our organisation uses more than just 121. How that's going to look, not sure. So it's yes, I've made my displeasure known. There's an email you can email NFPA. I think it's just feedback or something at nfpa.org. Email them and just explain to them. The more they get, the more they probably won't change their mind. I think this is in for good, and it'd be interesting to see what happens from here. Randy did make representations on behalf of all fire investigators, and nothing has changed in that. So there will be no PDF available. So the hard copy is there. If you want to get a copy of the hard copy, you can buy it through FPAA. It's about $140 plus postage. But you can contact Janet Fitzpatrick there. That's her email direct, or just search for it. At the moment, you can see there they haven't updated it's only the 2017 edition. But at the moment, I ordered a bunch for our office, and it took about 10 days from the US to get out here. So that's basically it. I do want to say to you all that, certainly fire investigation, as part of your duties as a fire investigator, you need to stay up to date with what's going on in the world. And part of that is certainly the production of the new edition of 928, 921. So certainly your growth in this industry and in your work is based on your willingness to invest. So invest in yourself, go and get the new edition, and make sure you keep up to date as much as possible. We're looking at just on the hour now. I think that's about it from my perspective. Are there any questions that you want to unmute yourself, or you want to type on a chat? Happy to take any questions. Hopefully I might be able to answer them.
Michael, it's Jeff Maher, the president of AFI. I'd just like to thank you and Robert on behalf of Victoria and all the other chapters for putting this together. It's been a bit of a challenge for us over the last 6 months.
Yes, it has.
Particularly in Leperville, aka Victoria. So look, we really appreciate you putting in the time tonight and not starting on the red wine as early as you normally do. So once again, thanks very much to the both of you, and also I'd like to thank Nicole and also Peter Mansourian for sorting out our end. So that's all from me.
Thank you, Jeff. Is there one question there? What's that one? Oh, Greg just says thank you. Thank you, Greg. Yeah, I think that's about it. If you're a New South Wales AFI member, we have our AGM coming up in November. We're going to do that by Zoom on the 5th of November, Bob. Is that right?
No, 29 October.
Oh, 29 October.
Yes.
Very good. So if you want to join in then, that'd be great. Other than that, this has obviously been recorded. We'll let you know where we're going to put it. Pass it on to your friends, tell all your neighbours, and like us. Very informative. Thank you. That's from Grant. Thank you, Brett. So thank you all. If there's no other questions, I think we might stop the recording and say good night.
Right, I will do that now, and thank everybody for your presence and attention and